The Trump administration is expanding its Remain in Mexico policy by allowing to send most asylum seekers to Mexico, regardless of where they cross the border. Our immigration and politics reporter, Camilo Montoya-Galvez, says it is the latest attempt to end a system President Trump and others have criticized as catch and release. Camilo joins me now from Washington. Camilo, thank you so much for being with us. What exactly is different with this latest move by the administration?
Good afternoon, Tanya. So the administration now believes it has the ability to return most migrants who express fear to Mexico, regardless, as you mentioned in the intro, of where U.S. officials encounter or apprehend them along the border. Returns and court hearings for migrants placed in this controversial program known as the Migrant Protection Protocols continue to occur at or near 5 ports of entries. But DHS told me this week that they have effectively expanded this policy across the entire border because U.S. officials can now transport migrants across different sectors, place them in the program, and return them to Mexico.
So does this mean that Mexico has to accept more people at the border? Does Mexico have a say about any of this?
That's a great question, but the answer is unclear. When President Trump threatened to impose tariffs on Mexican goods back in June, the government there agreed to the expansion of this policy, but I don't know if this is a sustainable situation for Mexico. As of this week, Tanya, the U.S. has returned more than 50,000 asylum seekers to Mexico, and 1,000 more who have been placed in these unofficial waiting lists to apply for asylum at a U.S. port of entry are also stranded in Mexico. So I think only time will tell if the Mexican government will continue to accept this.
So, Camilo, take us back a little bit. Remind us why the president has frequently criticized what he calls the catch and release policy. Why is this administration so opposed to it?
Yeah, so let's explain what this is. This is the practice of releasing migrants, mostly families with children or individuals seeking asylum, who cross the U.S.-Mexico border illegally, but otherwise don't have criminal records. These migrants with extra legal protections are typically detained for a few days or weeks and then released to local shelters with a notice to appear in immigration court. But President Trump and other administration officials have frequently denounced this as a loophole in U.S. immigration law that incentivizes economic migration, and now they have vowed to bring an end to it.
And there are, numbers that show how many of these immigrants return to their asylum cases, correct?
Yeah, a lot of them are being returned. Like I mentioned earlier, more than 50,000 asylum seekers who express fear of persecution in their home countries are now being required to wait in Mexico.
Right. And once they check in, though, before this the administration changed the catch and release policy, once these immigrants check in and they get their court date, how many of them return? Do we know that?
Oh, no, we don't have that number yet, but, that's something that will be very important to find out.
Okay, great. So is this the administration's plan, then, to end the so-called catch and release policy?
This is part of it, right? When acting Homeland Security Secretary Kevin McAleenan said this week that he would end this program, he said he would accomplish this to a two-pronged approach, right? He said that his agency will generally place all migrants who fear for their safety in their home countries in this Migrant Protection Protocols program and return them to Mexico, and that DHS will return those migrants who do not claim asylum to their home countries in a fast-track deportation process. But it's important to note, Tanya, that there are certain humanitarian exceptions to this Remain in Mexico program, and the U.S. has generally only returned non-Mexican Spanish-speaking migrants to Mexico. So in theory, DHS will still likely have to detain a substantial number of migrants, at least temporarily, in the U.S.
And how are immigration advocates and immigration lawyers responding to this?
Well, they continue their criticism of this Remain in Mexico policy, right? Because the U.S. government alleges that this policy allows caseworkers to kind of weed out the good and the bad asylum cases. But advocates say that this policy has placed tens of thousands of asylum seekers in very dangerous Mexican border cities where, the chances of finding shelter, protection, food, employment, and most importantly, U.S. lawyers are slim.
All right. Well, Camilo Montoya-Galvez, we thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya.